You're listening to Storystruck. I'm Rachel, an editor and writing coach.
And I'm Nino, a ghostwriter and book coach. Welcome to our curious community where we dive into everything books and writing.
Now, let's get into the episode.
Allison Perry Sower to podcast. I'm so freaking glad you're here. We've known each other for a minute, but why don't you introduce all of your amazingness and why you're here to our audience?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you both for having me. I'm excited to talk with you today. So I am Allison Perry Sower. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm a military family member and a nonprofit founder, and hopefully soon a published author. So I connected with you, Nino, because I am writing a professional memoir about my journey beginning around the 9/11 timeframe, which was when my brother was serving in the military and had recently been transferred from flying Black Hawk helicopters to flying Apaches, which are gunships. And so my brother deployed for the invasion of Iraq in 2003, flying attack helicopters, which he actually joined the military wanting to fly humanitarian aid missions to Latin America during peacetime. So very different mission. And so that was incredibly impactful for me and my family. My brother's just 13 months younger than me. So this kicked off a whole journey. So I was in graduate school for a master's degree in counseling while my brother was in Iraq. And then I ended up working for the VA for 6 years. I basically cold called the VA in Portland, Oregon, and I called 3 times. And I got a call back from a woman who said, "I'd like to interview you. We have a wait list." And they were having Vietnam vets come into the VA for the first time ever. This was 2005. So they were flooded with Iraq and Afghanistan vets, as well as Vietnam vets and many, many other veterans coming in. So I spent 6 years as a trauma therapist in the VA, working on the PTSD clinical team, general mental health clinic, substance abuse, you name it, at the large medical center in Portland, and then at a community-based outpatient clinic. They're called CBOX. Still for the VA in Central Oregon, so a more rural community. So really kind of getting a picture of veterans across the lifespan. I like to say from age 92 to age 22 to age 92, all different branches, all different eras, different conflicts, different wars, different missions. So that was a transformative experience and also a traumatizing experience, not only for many of the veterans in the system, but for me, myself. And so I ended up, while I was in the VA, having a vision for a nonprofit, which is a 19-acre working farm that uses agriculture and peer support for combat veterans that is currently in its 10th year of operation in Oregon. And so that's what I'm writing a book about, is the journey of being that family member. My brother just retired this year after 28 years active duty Army. He ended up doing 2 more deployments in Iraq as a medevac pilot. My husband, I now live in Colorado in the Denver area with my husband, who is also a combat veteran. So this is a very personal journey, but also a professional journey. And so I want to share with people I want people to have a connection to what I'm writing about, a cathartic, a therapeutic, and an insightful and an inspiring connection to what I'm writing about.
That is wonderful. And I want to say thank you so much for, the work that you did for veterans and also for your brother for his service. So I am a prior military spouse. I was married to an infantryman in the Army for 16 years who did 3 combat tours and, saw a lot, did a lot. And, that kind of pushed me towards getting my PhD in psychology as well. Obviously, the world took me somewhere different, but I did have an opportunity in Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, and I worked with Tripler Army Medical Center. I was working on base as an art teacher. So I helped them to do a pilot program of art therapy for some of the soldiers who were being treated at the hospital who had physical and psychological trauma. And it was just an incredible experience to get them out of the traditional therapy setting and into something kind of like you're talking about, that it's outside the box. And their counselors that attended with them said they opened up more in these sessions here with you than they have ever done just in like the one-on-one or even the group at the hospital. So I just know from like that experience, like I can only imagine how transformational it is for them to be doing something like you're doing. So thank you so much for doing that and being willing to come in and share your story and your journey on doing this memoir about it as well.
Thank you, Rachel. It's funny because art therapy is actually what took me from Georgia to Oregon. I moved when I was 28. I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, and I ended up getting a master's in counseling, but I was pursuing programs in art therapy. So I'm really an artist at heart, and that plays into also why I want to write a book.
Lovely. Yeah, I wanted to do art therapy, but being a military spouse, I just was never somewhere long enough to be in a program. So that was a challenge.
And you had an amazing documentary come out on Amazon Prime about your ranch and everything you've created and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. In 2022, a veteran that I had actually known going back in my VA days, he is an Oregon National Guard combat veteran career who spent time in Iraq in 2004, which is a really heated time. So he'd been featured in some documentaries and said, hey, when the timing is right, I'm going to introduce you to a woman in Los Angeles. She's a film producer, Suzanne De Laurentiis. And so he introduced me to Suzanne. We had a phone call. Within a few weeks, I was down in LA. We were talking about making a documentary, and a month later, we were filming. So the documentary is called Cover Me, The Path to Purpose, and it is on Amazon. It should also be on Roku, IMDb TV, Just Watch, and Apple TV. People can search for the platform they prefer, but it is on Amazon. And it's just under an hour, and it's an award-winning film. It's won awards in Europe and at psychology film festivals here in the United States. And it really shows the essence of what we were doing out in Oregon. It's pretty much between me and veterans telling the story of the environment there. So the ranch is a 19-acre working farm. It's got beautiful postcard views of the Three Sisters Mountains in Central Oregon. Central Oregon has a just absolutely beautiful high desert landscape. There's animals, sheep, llamas, chickens. There's a hydroponics greenhouse. And really the whole methodology behind it is building community. And I call it trauma informed because it's really a veteran only environment. There are specific times when civilians are welcomed in, but it's really about creating that kind of safe bubble where veterans can just be veterans and connect with each other. And kind of like you were saying earlier, Rachel, those non-traditional methods, which is funny because actually this is the original traditional method, is being in community and being out in nature.
Yeah.
Connecting organically and allowing things to emerge and come up organically. And then just the whole concept of being around life and creation and beauty, and the beauty of creation is very healing to the soul. And this is something that I'm writing about this right now, this journey in the VA and sort of the challenges of working in an institution and the cold clinical aspects for that, not only for the veterans, but for the clinicians.
Yeah.
Being in a small office with white walls and fluorescent lights, and just sort of there's a lack of beauty. And I heard this once, and I don't know who the quote is from or if it's just a generic quote, but that beauty is the language of the soul. And when you're working as a trauma therapist, and especially with combat veterans, it is a deeply spiritual experience. You cannot get away from it. And I don't know how you cut that out of the work. And I think, honestly, this is one of the reasons why we have an ongoing veteran suicide crisis, because there's a phenomenal book some of your readers might be interested in by an author named Ed Tick. And Ed started working with, he was a psychotherapist and started working with Vietnam vets in his small town, in his community, who he had gone to high school with, who were coming back from Vietnam before PTSD was a diagnosis. PTSD was not a diagnosis until 1980. So I have a huge heart for our Vietnam vets who really, really suffered and had no services when they got home. But Ed Tick describes PTSD as post-terror soul distress. So it's interesting from a writing perspective, trying to capture sort of the journey I went through in the VA of being new in a system and trying to learn a system, but then also seeing the inadequacies of the system and kind of going through my own burnout, my own vicarious traumatization, my own compassion fatigue, hitting a wall, and needing to take a leave of absence. So we were talking before we started the podcast about the process of writing about trauma, whether it's your own or that which you are encountering. And you can't help but get some level of trauma from working closely with people who have been traumatized.
Yeah. Heard the term secondary post-traumatic stress disorder, and I don't think it's a DSM diagnosis, or not yet, or whatever. But like,
Right.
I can understand how, as a therapist, it could be a real struggle. And then, like, as you're in the process of writing your memoir about this process, I know a lot of people who start writing memoirs, a lot of that trauma comes back up, because usually they're talking about their own trauma. And a lot of that comes back up. But can you talk about that experience of like navigating that, and then also then translating that through the writing process?
Yeah, I will. And I want to say a few words about kind of what happened to me when I was in the VA around that, because I remember in graduate school hearing about vicarious trauma and secondary trauma, burnout. And I was like, those are just concepts until I actually experienced all of it. And there is a difference between burnout, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma. And something I also taught in Oregon at our state police academy for 4 years. I co-facilitated a veterans awareness class and also helped train recruits how to respond to a mental health crisis. And one of my colleagues developed the curriculum, and I remember just being stunned when she was teaching this, and she said to the students, when the brain hears about a trauma, it is responding as if it's happening. So if you're hearing about a rape, you're hearing about someone getting molested, you're hearing about the gory details of someone being killed in combat. So there's multiple things happening. You're not only hearing and absorbing the story in your brain and in your heart and in your soul, you're sitting with the pain of the person in front of you, and the energy of that is in the room. And you're kind of, I almost think of it as like a psychic time travel, because you're sitting in this kind of sacred enclosed space with this person who's taking you on this journey back into this war, or combat, or their childhood, or their injury, and so there's so many multiple layers. I was facilitating at one point in Bend in Central Oregon 4 combat PTSD groups of mostly Vietnam veterans. One group was 20 guys. There were a couple World War II, a couple Korean vets, but I felt like this was 2008. And I said to myself, is it 2008 or 1968? I mean, I was hearing about Vietnam all the time during the week, not to mention my other caseload. I was doing a substance abuse group. I mean, I was working with all kinds of other veterans. So, and I had very little support. That's the difference between working in a big medical center where you have tons of resources, different teams you can farm people out to, colleagues, clubs, consultation groups. When you're in a rural clinic, it's kind of one-stop shopping, and you absorb everything and you see everyone. So at one point, I started having Vietnam combat jungle nightmares, and I was waking up from them literally with adrenaline shooting through my body. I was making sure I was very hypervigilant about safety in my home. I lived in an apartment by myself. I was very hypervigilant about my door being closed. I had a shoe rack on my door, and I thought I'll hear it if someone tries to break into my room. This is not even my front door. This is my room, So I was really getting vicariously traumatized. So I noticed it was really interesting as I was writing about this, because there's certain parts of my book I'm writing about. It's like really fun, right? Like you mentioned in your newsletter this morning, getting into the flow. And I was writing about going on a retreat at a monastery in Oregon and meeting my little World War II vet monk buddy, and it was just like this delightful, mystical, charming experience. And I'm like, this is so great. I'm in the flow of writing. Awesome. It's just going to keep going. And then I get to this section, and it took me a while to realize what was happening. Because you think, it's so interesting. We stigmatize these things so much, and we don't believe really like in the unseen world or the spiritual world or the life of the soul or how subtle these energies are. And so that all gets dismissed, right? But it's like I was in the psychic space again of what I went through. I was reliving it.
Mhm.
I didn't even really realize it. And then concurrent with that, which was interesting, my husband, who is also a combat veteran and a federal employee, this was happening around the same time the layoffs with the federal government were happening, that all of these positions, and like overnight, like probationary employees gone overnight, locked out of the building, locked out of email, like no chance to say goodbye to colleagues. Like this is happening on a real level, right? And then we don't know if my husband's going to lose his job. He works for Department of Energy. His Western region, they lost 1/3 of their staff. So this is all happening at the same time. And so I started having nightmares again because I'm writing about this experience of being in the VA and getting vicariously traumatized. This is happening. I was a federal employee for 6 years. So it's not only the trauma aspect of what I was doing, it was the fact that I had been a federal employee. So I could imagine
Mhm.
what my husband was going through and what other federal employees were going through. And then also I had a really hard time after 9/11. I think a lot of people did. I grew up on the East Coast. My brother was in the military and I'm an empath, so I can't help but feel or imagine what people are feeling. And so this was in a weird way bringing up all of these, it's like they say when you have a death or a loss, it can bring up previous losses and the grief associated with those. So it was really interesting though to me just to not realize at first what was happening, that the work, and in this case, I think kind of combined what was with what was literally going on in real life, but started to trigger these nightmares. And so I think that's something really for folks to take into consideration if you are writing about your own trauma or difficult things, just to realize it's a spiritual journey, and it can take you back into that place.
Go for it.
That really speaks a lot to the power of story. Like you hearing these stories was giving you a taste of this trauma because our brains try on stories. And that's also why something like a memoir can be such a healing process for a reader, because they're reading your story that may be similar, probably as similar to something that they have been through, and then they're reading about your overcoming it, so they're able to try on this overcoming and
Yeah.
try on the journey after, and feel what that's like, and then use that information from your memoir to then find a path to healing for themselves. Really can be helpful for people going through a trauma. So when we're reading traumatic memoirs, you know navigate that process by vicariously navigating it with the author. Rachel and I, huge memoir fans. The two of us get on like discussions of it. It's such a powerful healing tool. And I think for a lot of authors, it can be very healing for themselves to write the memoir because you're processing it and stuff. But it can also be something to where you end up needing more external support again because the stuff is being relived because you're writing about it and stuff. Sorry, Rachel, what did you want to say?
You're all good. So you brought something up for me too. So it was great that you chatted first. So two things to touch on. First, we had Nino and I had an episode solo one where we were talking about the power of story and nonfiction and how sometimes memoirs can be just as healing or even more transformational than a traditional self-help book because they're using story. We learn so much through story. It's such an integral part of who we are that is incredibly transformational for the reader. So to know that when you are writing a memoir, you do have a lesson or something that you're teaching and imparting on the reader, even though you may not intend it as so. What you're writing is very powerful and extends beyond your story. And then the other part was kind of you talking about this being, kind of a spiritual experience and, talking about being empathic. And I feel like people who are drawn to memoir tend to be a little bit more empathic. Like we have a reason we want to share our stories. And that it's, very important to protect our energy during that time and we'll kind of set up those, boundaries of, okay, I'm kind of recognizing that I'm getting to this point where maybe this is a little bit too much, and kind of knowing maybe I need to kind of put a pause on this for a moment,
Mhm.
sit and digest it, maybe go see a counselor somewhere like Allison, who, has a background in trauma informed counseling, or speak to whoever it is in your life that is someone that you're comfortable talking to. And then energetic wise, so I'm a Reiki master, so I'm very much about protecting your energy, the flow of energy, and how trauma can kind of cause those blockages and then come back up. So I'm all about getting in your space, getting in your zone, putting up your boundaries and protecting yourself, and just being aware that writing a memoir may be a little bit more than you thought you were going to take on in the beginning. You might have been like, oh, I'm over this. Like, I've processed it. I'm good. And then all of a sudden you're like, hold on a minute. That brought up something totally new. I didn't like remember that. I didn't think about that, or I wasn't as good with it as I thought I was. So just to give yourself some grace as you're going through that experience.
Also the, kind of when you're writing about it and you're looking back in retrospect and you kind of, more and you've been through more, and there's this kind of really opportunity to have some self-compassion and to say,
Mhm.
wow, I was really going through a lot. And part of the traumatization is, you mentioned earlier, we're very isolated now. And I think there is a level of connection we experience through technology, but there is really nothing that can replace that human to human contact. And what I'm trying to do with the book as well is elucidate themes that are relevant, weave them as threads throughout sort of the segments. Like if it's through the lens of the military family member, it's the lens of the trauma therapist, what I see with my veterans, what I'm going through in my own experience, because in some ways there's a parallel process of being traumatized by the system and the soul kind of being drawn towards these healing things. And one of them is community. We don't heal in isolation. We don't grow in isolation. We don't mature and develop in isolation. And so this idea of being in community is so important. So with the book, or being in nature. So I'm really trying to kind of weave these themes in that are elements of healing that people can access on their own, without necessarily going specifically to the nonprofit, like that was the place that was created. But that's one of the things I'm trying to do with the memoir. And it's a very interesting journey.
Writer, the process is very isolated usually. And you have to go into yourself to really write from yourself. I call it writing from the soul, because like when you're really having something that you're very purpose driven about, it is something your soul is calling you to do, and so you have to write from that place. And so when you're going through that process, when you're in that deep self reflection of what you're writing, knowing the how did you navigate this writing process as somebody who is obviously brilliant, but a new uh, modality for you maybe, or whatever, like, so as a newer writer, how did you navigate this isolated process while still like finding the flow in your writing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, part of it was meeting you. I really believe I'm going to share a quote with you that, again, I can't take credit for, and I can't give you the author because I heard it from someone else. I heard it from, there's a nonprofit in Oregon called Sacred Art of Living Center. And it was started by a 30-year retired hospital and hospice chaplain who had worked a lot with the dying. And you want to talk about matters of the soul. But the quote is, when you take one step closer to your soul will take 1,000 steps closer to you.
Oh, love that.
Yeah. And so something that, as you said, the call to write a memoir. And for me, this has been a journey about what is my soul calling me to do, because my soul called me to leave the VA. Didn't make sense to a lot of people. Wasn't, a family member told me leaving the VA was the stupidest thing I ever did. And I say, well, I think it was the most brilliant thing I ever did. And it saved my life, But I have noticed, and this is again something I'm trying to capture in the memoir, that when you listen to your soul, when you make a decision, when you commit, the universe, God, whatever works, whatever spiritual language works for people, brings things into your life, brings people into your life. And this was the process when I committed and I said, I'm going to leave the VA. I'm going to pursue my dream. What's the worst that can happen? If my veterans can survive combat, I can survive taking a risk for a few years to try to start a nonprofit. Little did I know how stressful it's going to be, but this is what I've experienced, and like for real, being connected to you, and so I received a volunteer retired literary agent to help guide my process. My husband and I were sitting on our patio talking to our neighbor. My husband's been living here for a while. I've been here a couple of years. He says, "Oh, my sister's a retired literary agent in Florida. If you want to send me a couple of things, I can send it to her." And I'm thinking, oh yeah, sure. Whatever. It's like probably that somebody that just does a little editing here and there. This woman spent her entire career as a literary agent in the publishing industry. She recommended a book to me, which I wanted to share. I think I told you about this, Nino, and I wanted to share this for
I got
Jeff Herman's book, which is really excellent. So this is someone that came to me that's totally donating her time to work with me because she also has a heart for veterans and for writers and for writing and literature. And so having people like that in the periphery, or I think in terms of the self-care piece, of course I'm married, so that's helpful. So being able to talk with my husband about it, who's very excited and wants me to keep reading him chapters. And, that's helpful, except for when I'm like, oh, this is a crap chapter. Marking up the page and having to go back. But it's unplugging from it, right? It's kind of going in and out of that psychic space and having the awareness that that's what you're doing. So being very conscious and intentional about what you're doing. And then I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of amazing people in my life. That was something else I realized at a certain point in my life, that I could kind of be a victim of circumstance and of self-pity. And, at a certain point when I was in the VA, I was unmarried. I didn't have kids. I had a lot of friends and colleagues that were married and had children and had support. And I didn't. And a lot of that was related to my own childhood trauma. And so I decided at a certain point in my life to create my own family, create my own network of people. So I'm sorry if you hear noise outside, there's a very loud leaf blower going by. I'm the kind of person that reaches out. A lot of people, and we talk about this a lot with veterans or people going through mental health, people feel like they can't reach out. They can't ask for help. They can't connect because they're going to be a burden, or they're going to overwhelm someone, or someone's not going to relate to them. And I just think it's important to reach out. And even if it's like, hey, I need to go get a cup of coffee, or, remember the bigger picture and reconnect to other parts of your story.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I know like writing a memoir is very personal, and not only are you processing what you're writing, but you are exposing that to the world, because obviously people are going to read your book. So I'd love to know kind of your thoughts, at least for like you personally, of how you feel kind of going through that process. And then, as you're pursuing that path to publishing, thinking, oh, wow, like it's not just me that wrote this, like this is going to be in people's hands, and they're going to get this peek behind the curtain at my life, where, usually us as well, working in therapy and counseling, we usually, play stuff close to the chest. We don't necessarily share parts of ourselves. So I'm just wondering, your experience with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I tend to be a pretty open book in general. I tend to sometimes be like authentic to a fault. And I think this is what I loved about working with combat vets is you can't work with combat vets effectively unless you're going to be really real, and they need to know who you are. And they, as my Vietnam vets used to like to say, we have really strong bullshit meters. And so you have to be really real, and they have to know why you're there, and, why you want to try to help, and who you are. So, the challenge has been for me, you get a lot of different advice and feedback. And I did meet with a lovely woman named Crystal Wright. She's a hybrid publisher. She runs a small agency in Florida called Moonglade Press. And we talked about the level of detail, right? So with memoir, you can get a little bit too much into detail, personal details that are fascinating and brilliant and interesting to you, but like no one else gives a crap. And so it's kind of like being able to discern, is this going to be meaningful to someone else, or is this just some stupid detail that was like this synchronicity that I thought was like, God's hand in my life, so kind of teasing those things out. But also, what's really hard for me because of my authenticity and because I love to be a very colorful storyteller is having to be very cautious and mindful when writing about other people, because some of my best stories are about people that like were really crazy. People that, coworkers that I worked with that were really like one I call the prickly pear, like people that, like you could paint a really brilliantly funny picture of them, but it would probably be really devastating to them in real life. Or people that came through my nonprofit, because people come to nonprofits with all kinds of agendas, and most of it's good. Most of it's, you meet people who you swear are angels because they're coming just out of the goodness of their hearts. They just want to give. They just want to serve. And you're like, oh my gosh, in some ways it restores your faith in humanity. And it's really powerful when veterans see that. But then you also get, and this is the minority, thank goodness, you get really like egomaniacs, and you get people that are personality disorder. You get people that come in that could really easily destroy your organization, or just bring drama, wreak havoc, chaos. And so that's something. So I don't have a problem kind of sharing my own vulnerabilities and my own traumas. I mean, and there's a barrier, it's not like it's all on the table. I joke with my husband that's the tell-all memoir that comes after this one, that's the personal memoir. This is a professional memoir. But it's also balancing what's going to be helpful and useful for the reader, instead of just like, I need to get this all out. This needs to be out there. It's like really relevant and important to people. But I have found that because I do love telling stories in general, like with people in conversation, I'm from the South, and the Southerners are storytellers. And so that's been one of the challenges, is trying to kind of paint people in a neutral light, or use a lot of skill and craft to kind of allude to the reality without, dragging people's names through the mud or painting really funny but disparaging pictures of them.
That seems like quite the balancing act. And I know a lot of memoir authors have a real difficulty with like, okay, how do I write this memoir and include the people in my life throughout my life that have impacted my life, sometimes for good, sometimes for evil, but in a way that is not going to get me sued.
Right.
Like navigating, like, do I include the ex-husband in this? He was real important in all of these things. Like, do I include him in this? Like, do I use his name? Do I change his name? Like, there's a lot to navigate with that. And that, I think, is something that a lot of memoirists will avoid writing their memoir, because they're like, well, I can't, put this out there and have it include my ex-husband, and then it'll affect my kids. And I know that like Glennon Doyle, her memoir, she talks about that process of the difficulty of like, how do I put this memoir out there and talk about my husband's infidelity when our 3 kids are going to be able to read this book? Like, how do I approach that and stuff? And she can talk about that process in Untamed. But yeah, with the process, speaking of process, with the process of your path to publishing, have you had any like expectations versus reality moments of like, oh, I thought this was going to be one thing and it is not, because like publishing is like so gate kept in so many ways. So I'm so glad you shared that book. I will also link that book in the description below, so that way if anyone wants it, they can check it out. But what is that process like for you?
It has been a wake-up call to reality. And I just read an agent, and I believe he's an author as well. Something he wrote on his profile about the agency he works for. He said, the publishing industry is the most subjective industry there is. It's very subjective. And so that was actually helpful. That was kind of like, okay, so there's really no rhyme or reason, and it's not skill or luck or it's a convergence of multiple factors that are random and that may coalesce to form into something. But I think the biggest one was I was very successful in starting my nonprofit. I was very determined. I was very focused. I was very persistent. I didn't let any obstacles get in my way. That resulted in making an award-winning Hollywood documentary. So I'm, just like, I can do anything. I'm a networker, I'm a connector, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be easy. Now, I may not have thought it was going to be that easy, but I thought it was going to be doable, and my, God bless her, my volunteer retired literary agent, guided me through the whole process of getting my query letter written, putting together a full book proposal, which is like a tremendous amount of work. It's like a big grant proposal. It takes time. That in and of itself is like writing the book. It's just a huge project. And so getting that done, it was a lot of work. And so then you think, okay, I did this. I showed them that I'm serious. I put the work in, and then you send it off, or send your query letter. I think one of the surprises was how much work it is to solicit agents and publishers, because they all have different requirements. It's not just like everybody wants your query letter and your book proposal or one or the other. It's like, fill out this online, form, or send us 3 chapters from the middle of your book, or send us, there's just different requests and different requirements for each one. And I think kind of the part that was a little disheartening is there's definitely been an interest in my work, but it's more about having a platform and being well known. And, this is the real world. If you want to look at business, at the end of the day, it's about the money, right? Like business or profit is about profit, it's about money. And there are people like all of us here who run businesses that are also trying to do good work and help people. But the publishing industry is not, I don't think, really trying to help people. There may be.
It doesn't seem like there's a lot of them out there that are like, one hybrid press, I believe, is called She Writes Press, and they are working at trying to like raise more female voices. They just had this whole thing of like, hey, this is a contest for us to publish your book for free, and it's only for women of color because we want to raise, Black voices and things like that. And so like, there's a few out there. There are a few, but it's hard to find in the giant pile.
It is. And I would say this about Crystal in Florida, with Moonglade Press, same. She says, this is a passion project for her. She's not doing this to make millions of dollars. But that being said, all of the large publishers are in a place where, they're going to publish books by Joe Rogan or Mel Brooks, or what's her name? Mel Robbins. Sorry. I showed you my age there. Spaceballs. So, that's been something that's just been like, oh, you mean an award-winning documentary made in Los Angeles with a producer is not enough to like get me a ticket to get my book published? Come on. But it's another hill, it's another mountain, it's another adventure, it's another challenge. And I tend to be one of those people that's like, okay, tell me I can't do it and see what happens, because I heard that a lot when I was starting my nonprofit, especially from a lot of older men.
Yeah, not surprising. So yeah, I think it's interesting with like memoir. Memoir can be a little bit of a harder sell than like a self-help book or a fiction book. They're taking a little bit more of a chance with memoir. So that one is definitely something they're going to push a lot more for having a platform. And I would think too, with the documentary, like I would think like that's huge. You know what I mean? So it's just interesting for someone else to see like you already have that, and that this process was challenging for you. Like no matter what you're publishing, they're going to want an audience. A lot of people think that going with like one of the big traditional publishing houses, they're going to do all my marketing for me. They're going to solve all of my problems. I'm sorry, but no. They are expecting you to do a lot of that yourself as well. And they're taking, a big gamble on someone who hasn't published a book before. And so like looking for those smaller presses, that can be, a little bit of an easier route to get published. And then the only thing I caution folks with when you're looking at smaller presses or hybrid presses is to make sure that they are like legitimate, because there are a lot of scam places out there who are what we would call like a vanity press, where it's a pay to play. And you're paying them absurd amount of money for them to publish your book. And then they're also keeping a cut of your royalties on top of you paying all of this money to them. I ran into that a lot in my ghostwriting career of helping writers navigate that process. There are definitely wonderful, legitimate, beautiful small publishing houses out there. But I just always caution everyone, do your due diligence, take a look at everything. And if you have questions, reach out to other authors in the community to talk about the different options.
I remember you telling me that like when I was earlier on in my book ghostwriting and coaching process about the issue with the hybrid presses. And so I went in and I did a deep dive and I found a bunch of ones that are like highly respected across multiple platforms, and did the research and did deep dive into them because I was afraid that I was going to have a client that got taken by one because I didn't have anyone to refer them to. And so, fun fact, Mel Robbins is actually a hybrid press published author. So she is she's worked a lot with hybrid presses. I don't know if all her books are, but I do know that a good chunk of them have been through hybrid publishers and stuff. So it's like, also when you find a good one, like you can also like have a pretty, solid standing. Like you can make a big splash, when you do that. But it's so hard to navigate because there's so many, like
There's so
there's just so many, and that's just scratching the surface of it.
there's so much out there, and fortunately for me, this connection I have, the reason I found out about Moon and Glade is because a philanthropist, well, she's a philanthropist, but a former donor to my nonprofit started the publishing company. So I knew
Wonderful.
the person who started it and the person who took it over from. I also like Jeff's book because he has so many reputable people in there that, he lists in terms of agents and publishers. But one of the things I did realize and that I would caution people to look out for is anytime you see a 1-800 number, that's a pretty good sign that they are, I was like, oh, this one looks really good. And I'm like, wait, they've got offices in this city, in this city, in this city. And then it started to look like this big, like kind of marketing scam thing, and I'm like, oh, it's one of those,
Another book, in the description, the one that you love, and we'll also, the writer's market. That's one that I believe Rachel told me about a while ago, and another person that I spoke to, like in order to like find the ones that are legitimate in traditional and independent, but the hybrid is where it's tough. A lot of people are like saying, I have to do all the marketing. You're not going to give me a big advance. It's going to be a nightmare just to even get picked up. Like, why don't I just opt for self-publishing? Like.
Right. That's a great question because people have asked me that a lot. And it's a tough one because I personally am biased against reading self-published books.
Really?
All right.
It's a personal bias. It is. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it or I don't do it, but I'm more hesitant if someone hasn't agreed to collaborate and work with the person. And also, I think there's something to be said. I mean, having run a business, having run a nonprofit and been in a leadership role and worked with a lot of leaders in terms of, people who've been in leadership in the military, there's something to be said for the work it takes to find a publisher, whether it's a hybrid or it's it's you really see that someone's dedicated. This is really important to them. And for me, I want to work with someone else, not just for like, oh, I have a publisher, but to really learn from the process and to get input and to really make my work the best it can be. And so that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for a book is I want to see, I want to read something that's professionally done, that is quality. And I'm not saying that self-published books aren't or can't be, but I'm just a big fan of collaboration and learning from experts and having the humility to say, I want input and feedback from others because I want it to have an impact and be effective rather than just be about me, and how I want to do it. Because I do tend to be a stubborn person who wants to do it my own way, but I've matured and grown in life. And so the most important thing to me is the impact it has. It's not, it has to be this way for me. So that's a part of it for me.
And I think you bring up a great point there where we do see self-published books that maybe don't have the quality that we would see in a traditional book, but then we do see other ones that are like stellar. And those are the people, right, who are investing and seeking out those experts like you were talking about. They're, taking the time to invest in an editor, and usually a couple editors. Like, I'm a developmental and structural editor. I am not going to fix your typos. I'm not going to do your typesetting. Like, there are so many moving pieces that I think people also get a little overwhelmed, or they just don't know that there are like 3 to 4 different types of editing that your book goes through before it's going to go to press. And so, if you are going that, route, to make sure that you are seeking out that professional knowledge so that you can put out, a book that is the quality that makes you proud, and is on par with the other market. And I think too, something, and I don't know if you've experienced this as well, think about when they get to traditional publishing, is they don't realize the timeline and how long it will take. Like, say you submitted to one publishing house, and they're like, no, we don't want the book. It may not be that they don't want the book. If they don't want the book now, because we've just taken on 3 other memoirs. Even though we love Allison's memoir, we just took 3 on, and those are staged over the next 2 years. Because the publishers are pushing out, and they are selling to the buyers at different companies and things like that, and they can only take so many of different types of books at a time. So if you get a rejection, I think that's something also important to remember for folks, that it doesn't mean that your book is not good, or necessarily that they don't want it. They may want it, but they just can't take it now. And then to know that journey is usually several years between you actually getting the agent and publisher and seeing your book out there. It's not going to be, I'm going to have my book out next year. That may happen, but realistically, it's usually, a couple year process to go through the motions.
Exactly. And some advice that Crystal at Moonglade gave me that I thought, or no, this actually came from my retired literary agent friend, is if you find a publisher or hybrid publisher, or somebody that you're kind of looks good, but you're not sure about, she recommended getting 3 sort of letters of reference from authors, or speaking with authors who have published with that agency to get and she said, and vice versa, they should get references from people who've worked with you as an author to see how you work and see if it's going to be a fit. So I thought that was kind of interesting, almost like a job interview, like, give me 3 authors you've worked with. Me here, experience was like,
they can kind of vet you. That's really neat. So I know we're kind of approaching the end of our time together. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to share, or information about your book, or where folks can find you?
They can find me at my website. And if you want to include that, when this posts, it's AllisonPerrySower.com, Allison with 1 L. And if folks would like to see the documentary, I can send you a link to that too, to include Cover Me, The Path to Purpose. But people can sign up actually on my website if they're interested in reading the book once it's published. And so that's about it, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Your book sounds absolutely incredible, and I cannot wait to get eyes on it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation with both of you.
Thank you for coming, and we will have everything linked in the description below. And just one shameless plug. If you're a writer and you're desperate for a community that can help raise you up, as a writer, I have a free community for writers called Gemini Writers, and I will put that also in the link below. It is literally for free as of right now. I can't talk for future Nino, but it's just to have, build a community of writers who know the process and to believe in you and to cheer you on when you need it. So that'll be linked below, but I just wanted to drop that in there. But thank you so much, Allison, for coming on, and everything you need will be linked.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Check out the show notes for details and links from the episode. And don't forget to subscribe and follow for more. Special thanks to our composer, Micah Silverstein. Enjoy the rest of the music.